She held the envelope like a match, one touch, and the life they built would catch. What would you do if the proof of your miracle arrived on the same night you learned the person you love is already planning a future without you? If this question hits, stay with us. But before we begin, if you enjoy powerful, thought-provoking stories drawn from real lives, tales of love, betrayal, mistakes, and second chances, I'd be grateful if you gave this video a like and hit subscribe. It helps others discover this corner, where life itself writes the most dramatic scripts. And share with me in the comments, where are you watching from, and what time is it right now? It's always fascinating to see how these stories travel across the world and connect us all. Now take a deep breath, clear your mind, sir, and let's step together into a story that just might change the way you look at life. Geneva Neve Ellis adjusted the wig until the blunt white bob framed her face. The oversized glasses sat heavy on her nose, lenses clear but designed to erase familiarity. Dark shadow and thick liner pulled her eyes into a stranger's shape. The uniform clung sharp. Black pencil skirt, white blouse, apron, tied so tight it dug into her waist. Nothing about her said wife, nothing said expectant mother. Tonight she was only a server. The envelope pressed against her side told a different truth. 4 weeks pregnant after years of failure. It was the secret that could change everything. Leon Isaacs, the floor manager, passed by with the quick nod of a man juggling a dozen fires. His voice was low enough for her alone. "You're covered. Just act like staff." She answered without hesitation. "I'm ready." He didn't know the envelope's weight, only that she wanted one night behind the tray. A small conspiracy for love. The room breathed wealth. Tables dressed in linen, glassware shining, music smoothed to a warm hum. Neve traced the path she had rehearsed. Kitchen to head table, step, pivot, smile, return. On that tray she would place champagne in a white envelope, letting Dimitri discover the miracle in front of his colleagues. She imagined the flicker in his eyes, the stunned joy, the way he once promised her, "You deserve the best, always." That moment was meant to live again. Then he entered. Dimitri King wore the suit that spoke of success, dark fabric cutting clean lines across broad shoulders. At 35, he had grown into his ambition, moving with the confidence of a man who built something from dust. Colleagues applauded, voices lifted in cheers, glasses rose. He gave the expected thanks, words about team and future, but his eyes betrayed him. They kept pulling toward the entrance, away from the crowd that celebrated him. Neve studied each glance like a code. She gripped the tray, heart racing, but forced her steps to remain even. Around her, the company glittered. Micah Rooks with his booming laugh, Anais Bell already orchestrating details. Lena Street marking the room with her sharp gaze. They looked at Dimitri as if he were the reason their lives would rise higher. Only Neve knew what miracle she carried, what she had prepared to reveal. The door opened again. Conversations dipped, the current of attention shifting. A young woman entered, no older than 24. Long honey blonde hair spilled against a fitted red dress, her figure precise, every line chosen to command eyes. Dimitri's face broke open. The mask of composure dropped, replaced with raw delight. His shoulders straightened, his smile unguarded. He moved toward her as if he had been waiting for this moment all night. Neve stopped 2 steps short of the head table. The tray tilted slightly before she caught it steady. The envelope burned hotter against her ribs. She watched him reach for the young woman's hand, watched his eyes soften, and felt the first crack in the story she thought she owned. She didn't know her name yet. She would learn it soon. Neve balanced the tray with practiced calm, but her ears strained toward the table where Dimitri sat with the young woman. Laughter scattered across the room, glasses lifted, yet the center of gravity had shifted. The man who once looked only at her now leaned close to another, voice low, almost hidden beneath the music. She moved along the edge of the crowd, collecting empty flutes, polishing them for cover. 2 words cut through the noise, divorce and soon. Dimitri's tone was hushed but urgent. The young woman answered with the confidence of someone who believed his promises. "My parents won't wait forever. They want you free." Neve's hand trembled once before she forced it still. Micah Rooks, flushed from drink, raised his glass high. His voice carried above the murmurs, "To the boss and his beautiful lady. What a pair." The crowd erupted in easy laughter. Some clapped, others whistled, the kind of toast meant to embarrass lightly. Dmitri smiled awkwardly. Evia laughed into her glass, and Neve felt the tray grow heavier. At a nearby cluster, Anais Bell leaned in toward Lena Street. Voices lowered, but not enough. "It's obvious," Anais said, eyes flicking to the red dress. Lena answered with a half-smile. "That's Dorsey blood right there. You know what that means. Money, influence, doors you can't buy with just hustle." Anais shook her head, pity shadowing her tone. "And his wife, she has no clue." Neve caught every word, though she kept her face blank. Dorsey. The name carried weight even she recognized, whispered in stories of wealth and reach. Her chest tightened, but no tears came. Not now, not in this room where every smile cut like glass. The envelope against her ribs felt like a brand, its promise mocked by the sight of Dmitri leaning close, Evia's hand brushing his. She inhaled slowly, forcing control. She had imagined tonight as revelation, the moment their struggle ended in joy. Instead, she stood invisible while the man she loved plotted his exit in another woman's ear. Yet even in the collapse, clarity came. She would not announce her miracle. She would not expose her heart to their laughter. The envelope stayed hidden. Neve straightened her back, let the tray settle firm in her hands, and made a silent vow. If her marriage was crumbling, she would not meet its ruin blind. She would listen, she would watch, she would gather every truth. When the time came, her strike would be sharp and final. The apartment was dark except for the glow of the laptop screen. Geneva Neve Ellis sat at the kitchen table in her nightclothes, hair uncovered, eyes bare, the disguise of the evening folded away. The white envelope lay on the counter beside her, unopened again, as though the truth inside could wait until she found a way to make sense of the rest. 10 years of marriage, the long road of doctors and treatments, the miracle of life she carried now, it all stood against the shadow of what she had heard. Her fingers moved quickly across the keys, searching every corner of the web for the name that had shattered her night. Dorsey. What emerged was a dynasty. The Golden Mile retail empire, malls, markets, money flowing through their hands. Eclat, the modelling agency led by the matriarch, polished and unforgiving. Every article, every profile repeated the same words. Reputation above all, no room for scandal, no patience for weakness. Anyone seeking their circle faced background checks deeper than law enforcement. They valued image more than affection, connections more than confessions. Neve pressed her palms together briefly, not in ritual but in instinct, whispering words that mixed prayer with determination. If Dmitri thought he could trade 10 years of shared struggle for an open door into that family, she needed to know exactly what he was walking into. She scrolled through headlines. Varick Dorsey praised for vision, Tatiana Dorsey praised for precision, their daughter Evia always framed as the jewel, money, power, access. The kind of leverage Dmitri dreamed about when he spoke of expanding prestige beyond its limits. Her thoughts drifted to him, to nights when he sat at the kitchen counter long after she had gone to bed, laptop open, eyes fixed on spreadsheets that never balanced. The company was surviving, yes, but growth had slowed. Expansion into bigger markets would cost millions he did not have. Prestige looked strong from the outside, yet the inside creaked with the weight of ambition outpacing reality. He had built something solid, but not unbreakable. And now she understood why Evia Dorsey had been more than a temptation. She was a strategy. Neve opened the folder where Dmitri sometimes left business files, careless in his certainty that she never checked. She read through contracts, invoices, payments. At first it looked clean, then she noticed the pattern. Small transfers routed through names she didn't recognize, payments noted but not explained. She clicked deeper, found companies flagged in news reports, construction firms tangled in bribery, entertainment groups linked to underground dealings, financial outfits accused of fraud. Her stomach tightened. These were not just questionable clients, they were liabilities. Prestige wasn't just chasing success, it was already tied to shadows. If the Dorsey family uncovered these links, Dimitri's golden path would collapse before it began. The envelope on the counter stared back at her, the proof of life she carried. She touched it once, gently, then slid it farther from reach. Tonight wasn't about hope. Tonight was about facts. And she had just found the first crack that could split his empire wide open. The morning light cut sharp lines through the glass walls of the Eclat agency. Geneva Neve Ellis had dressed with precision. Navy suit tailored close, heels muted in tone. Makeup sharp but professional. Her hair was styled into a sleek bun, and her voice rehearsed in front of a mirror until it carried the clipped cadence of a businesswoman. Tonight she would not be the disguised waitress, nor the abandoned wife. Tonight she was a representative, a strategist, a mask with purpose. The receptionist greeted her with polite efficiency. "You have a meeting scheduled with Mrs. Dorsey?" Neve nodded, her false name already written on the sign-in sheet. She had prepared a story too simple to be doubted, a cosmetics brand seeking partnerships with agencies who valued elegance and credibility. It was believable because it was ordinary. When Tatiana Dorsey finally entered the room, Neve felt the temperature shift. Tatiana was in her mid-50s but carried herself as though time bent politely around her. Slim, poised, draped in a cream suit that spoke of wealth without vulgarity, she embodied Eclat's reputation, untouchable and exacting. Her eyes, cold and precise, scanned Neve before the first word was spoken. "You represent a brand seeking our models," Tatiana began. No handshake offered. Her voice was smooth but lined with steel. Neve smiled faintly. "Yes, we're preparing a line focused on women above 30, a demographic often ignored. We believe Eclat is uniquely positioned for this campaign." "Campaigns come and go," Tatiana replied, folding her hands. "But reputations remain. We do not attach our name to just anyone. Everyone who seeks association with us is studied. Background checks, financial audits, reputation reviews. My family's name is never compromised." The words were delivered without malice, but Neve felt the edge in them. This was not merely business. It was a warning. We see everything. She met that warning with calm. "That's exactly why we came to you. We value reputation above all else." She let the silence stretch, then added lightly, "Though sometimes even the most polished surface hides flaws. A client list, for example, can tell stories no campaign ever reveals." Tatiana's gaze sharpened, a flicker too quick for most to catch. "What do you mean by that?" Neve lowered her eyes as if she'd said too much. "Nothing specific, only that in our business, due diligence is survival. Some agencies build their growth on clean partnerships, others on more questionable choices." She looked back up, her expression carefully neutral. "It would be wise, before investing in new ventures, to study those choices closely." For a moment, the room was utterly still. Tatiana tapped one manicured finger against the desk, considering. Then she leaned back, offering a controlled smile. "I see, you're not just a brand manager. You're a woman who understands the game." Neve inclined her head, as though acknowledging a compliment she didn't need. "We simply protect our interests, as I'm sure you do." The conversation drifted back to figures, timelines, and model availability, but the duel had already played out. By the time they exchanged contact details, the decision was made. Neve had planted doubt. Tatiana's eyes no longer carried only curiosity, they carried suspicion. She had seen something she couldn't unsee, a shadow now tied to the name Prestige. As Neve left the building, her pulse finally slowed. The mask had held. She had spoken just enough, not too much. And if Tatiana Dorsey truly lived by the creed of reputation first, then the seed Neve planted would not remain idle. It would grow into scrutiny. That evening, across town, Varick Dorsey reviewed a brief note from his wife. No emotions, only a single directive. Check Prestige thoroughly. Varick, older, heavier, and far less forgiving, passed the order without hesitation. A discreet investigation was launched. The man assigned to oversee it was Serge Miles, a security strategist with a history of digging until bones showed. Neve didn't know his name yet, but the game had just widened, and new eyes were now on Dimitri King. The storm didn't hit all at once. It came like pressure tightening from every side. First, the bank that once extended credit with a smile now demanded early repayment. Then another institution suddenly re-evaluated risk exposure and raised interest rates overnight. Dimitri King paced his office, fingers pressed against his temples, staring at spreadsheets that no longer obeyed him. Prestige was suffocating, and he couldn't see the hands around its throat. Behind the curtain stood Serge Miles. His reports were blunt. Push the banks, trigger tax audits, whisper to key clients about instability. Within weeks, long-standing contracts began to dissolve. Partners cited strategic changes, but the timing betrayed them. What once looked like a steady rise now collapsed into a freefall. Dmitri tried to keep the mask intact. To his staff, he repeated the same line. This is temporary. Once the deal with the Dorseys is signed, everything evens out. He repeated it so often that he began to believe it. But each evening his shoulders sagged lower. His phone calls with Evia are more desperate. Evia Dorsey found herself caught between two currents. She felt the pull of affection, the way Dmitri looked at her like she was salvation. Yet the family's code was carved in stone. No scandals, no attachments to the compromised. She smiled when he whispered promises, but in the quiet of her own room, she replayed her mother's words. We check everyone who enters our name. While Dmitri gambled on a future that was slipping from his hands, Geneva's world quietly shifted in a different direction. Dr. Ark Sorrell, her physician, placed the Doppler against her abdomen and smiled faintly at the steady sound of life. The pregnancy is holding strong, he told her. You're healthier than I've ever seen you. His visits became more than clinical. He lingered, asked how she was coping, reminded her she wasn't as alone as she thought. His presence was quiet, without demands, a steady rhythm against the chaos unravelling elsewhere. Niamh listened, nodded, but never revealed the truth of her night spent digging into Dmitri's empire. She let Ark believe he was her anchor. In a way, he was, but her mind remained fixed on the bigger war. Late one evening, as she sorted through another stack of financial printouts, her phone rang. The voice on the other end was formal, practiced. Mrs. Ellis, this is the office of Mr. Dorsey. He would like to speak with you personally. Her hand froze above the papers. The line that divided her quiet resistance from open conflict had just disappeared. The cafe was nearly empty, the kind of place chosen for silence rather than comfort. Geneva Niamh Ellis sat at a corner table, her hands folded neatly, eyes fixed on the black coffee cooling in front of her. She hadn't asked for sugar, hadn't even looked at the menu. Today wasn't about taste, it was about clarity. When Varick Dorsey arrived, the air seemed to shift. Older than his wife, heavier in frame, his presence carried the weight of decisions that had ruined and saved lives. He removed his coat with deliberate movements and slid into the chair opposite her. The staff knew better than to linger near him. For a moment he said nothing, only studied her face as if measuring the exact distance between strength and desperation. Finally, his voice broke the quiet. You are the wife, which makes you the source. Tell me, why? Why come to me? Niamh didn't flinch. Because truth matters more than vows already broken. I won't protect a man who built lies while I carried hope. She pushed the words out evenly, without tremor, though the hand resting against her stomach trembled once before she forced it still. Varick's gaze hardened, then softened in curiosity. Most women in your place would guard their family name. You hand me your husband instead. Her answer was simple. I hand you the truth. What you do with it is your choice. They sat in silence, the faint clink of porcelain from the counter filling the space between them. Then Varick leaned forward, lowering his voice. Let's be clear. If I move, I don't stop at business collapse. I push for criminal proceedings, tax evasion, fraud, laundering, the kind of weight that leaves a man behind bars, not in boardrooms. If I do this, there's no way back for him. Niamh's lips pressed together before she answered. That's what I want. Not revenge, certainty. If he loses only his company, he'll find another way back. If he's convicted, the cycle ends. He doesn't get to use women or families as ladders ever again. Varick studied her, searching for hesitation. He found none. Instead, he saw something else. A fierce stubbornness, sharpened by betrayal and protected by something larger than herself. What about you? He asked quietly. What about your future? Niamh finally allowed her hand to rest openly on her abdomen. I'm pregnant. 10 years of waiting, and now, finally, whatever you do to him, my child must be protected. That's the only condition. For the first time, the corner of Varick's mouth shifted into the ghost of a smile. That can be arranged. Money, housing, legal coverage. If you stand with me, the child will never lack. The deal hung between them like a drawn blade. Both understood it was more than strategy. It was principle. Niamh wasn't simply betraying her husband. She was aligning herself with power to ensure he would never rise on deceit again. Varick wasn't simply eliminating a liability. He was building a precedent. Anyone tied to his family would be measured, judged, and if necessary, erased. When he extended his hand, it was steady, deliberate, final. Niamh looked at it for a long moment, then placed hers in his. Their grip was firm, unshaken. The operation had a name now, though neither spoke it aloud. Confession. It would begin with whispers and end with documents. And once Dimitri King confessed, whether by choice or by force, his empire would vanish like smoke. Serge Miles arrived without ceremony, just as Niamh expected. He didn't waste time on greetings. From the inside pocket of his jacket, he produced a tiny object, no larger than a button, and placed it in her palm. "A recorder," he said plainly. "Sensitive enough to catch a whisper in a storm. Wear it. Let him talk. He'll trip himself if you give him room." Niamh turned the device over in her hand, so small yet heavy with consequence. Serge's eyes narrowed. "He's paranoid now, I know. He thinks shadows are moving, cars watching him. That's good. Via loosens tongues. Don't push. Let him believe he's extrahegling, not confessing. And remember, details matter. We don't need anger, we need evidence." Night she prepared dinner as if nothing in their world was broken. Dimitri walked in late, shoulders tight, phone in hand, ball. He tossed his jacket across a chair and muttered, "Someone's watching us. Same car outside the office, same eyes at the bank. You feel it." Niamh steadied her voice. "Maybe it's coincidence. Maybe you're tired." He shook his head. "No, this isn't fatigue. They're circling. Banks, clients, regulators. None of that lines up by chance. Someone wants prestige on its knees." His words carried frustration, but beneath it was fear. She leaned against the counter, soft and measured. "Even if someone's watching, you've survived storms before. How did you cover those scandals last year? The construction firm, the casino clients?" He looked at her, eyes sharp, searching for betrayal, then smirked bitterly. "Covered? No. Rebuilt, rebranded, same thing. You take their dirty name, wash it in gold paint and charge double. That's how we stay alive. A scandal, that's opportunity if you spin it fast enough." Niamh let silence stretch, nodding faintly, as if impressed. He continued, voice lower. "You know how many contracts run off the books, cash straight through me, never hits the reports. That's the real revenue. Official numbers are just for taxes." She set plates on the table, steady hands hiding the pulse racing beneath her skin. Every phrase he dropped was a blade carving his own downfall. When he finally sat, fork in hand, his words spilled freer. "I compete in accounting. They know the flows, they cook the ledgers. Without them, the whole thing collapses." He stabbed the air with his fork. "And that's why I can't believe we're under fire now. We've kept it buried for years." Later, as Dimitri dozed in front of the television, Niamh slipped into the bedroom. Her hands trembled as she removed the tiny recorder, tucking it into an envelope already marked for Serge. Hours of Dimitri's paranoia, boasting and damning admissions now lived inside a chip no bigger than a fingernail. By morning, Serge had the package, and before evening fell, 2 agents from the Revenue Authority walked into Prestige headquarters with an official warrant. Staff stared in stunned silence as files were boxed, computers sealed, and Dimitri himself left speechless in his own office. The confession had begun to eat him alive. The fall didn't arrive as a crash. It came as a chain reaction, one piece striking the next until nothing stood. Prestige was declared insolvent within weeks. Accounts frozen, contracts terminated. Newspapers, once hungry for his charm, now ran headlines dripping with suspicion. Cameras lingered outside his office, chasing the image of a man who once looked untouchable but now reeked of scandal. Dimitri King sat at his desk, no longer the polished leader but a cornered figure. The mask had slipped, and for the first time Evia Dorsey saw the man beneath it. Rage burned in his voice, but beneath it trembled desperation. "They're lying. Everyone's lying. The banks, the tax office, even clients I carried through their own disasters. You can't just abandon me, Evia. Tell your parents. They have to intervene. We can still win this." Evia's eyes searched his face. She had admired his confidence, his certainty, the way he moved as if every door bent open for him. But now she saw something different. Wildness, manipulation dressed as leading. "I can't ignore them," she said quietly. "My parents built everything on reputation. If they see you as a liability, I can't change their minds. I need to speak with them." Dimitri grabbed her wrist, not roughly, but with a grip that revealed panic. "You love me. That matters more than their codes, doesn't it?" Her voice broke as she pulled away. It matters, but so does the family name, and right now you're dragging it into the fire." She left him standing there, his words bouncing uselessly against the closing door. Across town, Varick Dorsey convened his family at the long dining table. His decision was already carved in stone. "The partnership is finished," he said flatly. "We cut ties now before his wreck drags us down. But Evia," he turned to his daughter, his tone softening only slightly, "until it's over, you will hold your composure. Smile if the cameras look. Say nothing of plans, nothing of endings. We control the story, not him." Tatiana nodded in agreement, her expression cold. "Reputation first, always." Evia lowered her eyes, torn between love and loyalty, but she obeyed. Meanwhile, Geneva stood in her kitchen, the envelope of medical results still locked away. She had told no one, not Dimitri, not even Sorrel, who watched her belly with the quiet understanding of a physician and a man who cared more than he said. She moved with icy composure through her days, but inside her chest raged a storm. Love, betrayal, the fragile hope of new life. It clashed like thunder without release. That night, as Dimitri tried to rally what little pride he had left, 2 officials arrived at his apartment. One handed him a sealed envelope, heavy with legal weight. Inside a summons, charges, tax evasion, laundering. He read the words once, twice, then let the paper fall to the floor. The empire he built with ambition was gone. Now the law had his name written in ink. The walls of the apartment felt closer than ever. Dimitri King paced the living room in a shirt half unbuttoned, tie loose around his neck, hair damp from sweat. He slammed a folder onto the table, papers scattering like broken glass. His voice cracked not with authority, but with a panic. "Nev, it's over. We're finished. They have everything." Geneva, never. Ellis looked up slower, schooling her face into confusion, as though she were the devoted wife blindsided by her husband's unravelling. Her hands tightened in her lap, but her tone stayed even. "Everything? What exactly do they have?" Dimitri dragged a hand down his face, exhaling hard. "Contracts, transfers, things I signed without thinking they'd ever matter, agreements with clients who couldn't afford exposure. They'll paint it as laundering." She tilted her head, feigning innocence. "And the ones who handled the messes, who took scandals and made them disappear. What did you promise them?" He sank onto the couch, eyes red, voice hollow. "Double fees. Always double after a scandal. That was the deal. They wanted clean reputations. We gave them new names, new campaigns. Ike and Pete built the books, moved the cash off record. Everyone played their part, and now they'll all testify to save themselves." Every word was another nail in his own coffin, and Neve let him hammer it in without interruption. She asked one more question, quiet but sharp. "Did you think none of this would come back?" His reply was little more than a whisper. "I thought I'd be untouchable once the Dorseys signed. That shield would have covered everything." Before dawn, Serge Miles had already moved the next pieces. Contractors who once hid behind Prestige's campaigns were quietly approached. Some resisted, most surrendered. Fear of the law outweighed loyalty to Dimitri. Their statements filled files thick with proof. Payments, favours, falsified reports. The case was no longer suspicion. It was certainty. By evening, the knock at the door was not a warning, but a sentence. 2 officers stepped inside, one reading charges with a flat voice. Tax evasion, laundering, fraudulent reporting. Dimitri didn't fight. His shoulders collapsed as cuffs closed around his wrists. Geneva stood by the kitchen counter, her hands wrapped around a glass of water she never drank. Her face carried just enough shock to seem believable, but her eyes stayed steady, following every movement as they led him out. He glanced at her once, searching for loyalty, but found only the mask she chose to wear. The door shut, leaving silence behind. She walked to the phone, dialed a number she now knew by heart. When Varick Dorsey answered, she spoke without hesitation. "It's done. He's gone." And for the first time in years, she felt the weight shift from her shoulders to his. The divorce papers travelled faster than any letter of love once had. From the cold walls of pre-trial detention, Dimitri King signed his name with a hand that shook, then slid the documents back across the metal table. No arguments, no bargaining, just a man stripped of power, conceding because there was nothing left to fight for. Geneva Ellis received the official notice weeks later, stamped and sealed. She was free. With freedom came movement. She left the apartment that reeked of memories and betrayal, settling instead into a modest house with sunlight in its windows and silence in its walls. The money Varick Dorsey had promised arrived discreetly, transferred through channels that left no questions. Lawyers, handpicked by the Dorseys, ensured Geneva's name and her child's future were shielded from the fallout. For the first time in years, she slept without fear of eviction, debt, or headlines. Still, safety didn't silence the storm inside her. Nights stretched long, the weight of her pregnancy pressing against both body and mind. It was Ark Sorrell who filled those hours with steadiness. He came not as saviour, but as constant presence, walking her through appointments, sitting with her in waiting rooms, carrying groceries when her steps grew slower. He never spoke of Dimitri, never asked for what she couldn't give. He simply stayed. In the Dorsey household, another lesson unfolded. Tatiana sat across from her daughter one evening, her tone firm but maternal. "Evia, strength is not in vengeance. It is in discernment. You must not waste yourself resenting a man who deceived you. Learn from this, guard your name, your heart, and remember, power is not proving someone wrong. Power is choosing what is right." Evia listened in silence, tears drying against her cheek. For the first time, she understood her mother's creed not as coldness, but as survival. Back in her own small kitchen, Geneva found herself one evening resting heavy in a chair, while Ark prepared tea. He placed the mug before her, sat across the table, and after a pause said quietly, "I need you to know, I'm here for the long haul. Not as a doctor, not as a neighbour, just as whoever comes, I won't leave." There was no grand gesture, no dramatic plea, just words simple enough to carry weight. Geneva met his eyes, and for the first time in months, she allowed herself to believe someone. She nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in her throat. Weeks later, in the pale light of a hospital room, Geneva laboured through hours that blurred together. At last, a newborn's cry cut the silence. A boy, strong, lungs fierce, body healthy. Geneva lay back exhausted, eyes wet, heart bursting. Ark was the first to hold him, arms steady, gaze reverent. "He's perfect," Ark whispered, though his voice trembled as he looked down at the tiny life in his hands. Geneva watched them, her son and the man who had chosen to remain when everything else had collapsed. For the first time in years, she did not feel abandoned. She felt anchored. Time reshaped everything. Months became years, and the life Geneva Ellis once thought impossible grew roots. The little house filled with sound, laughter, cries, footsteps that carried purpose rather than dread. Ark Sorrell was no longer just the man who had stood by her through the storm. He became her partner in every sense, the steady ground she could finally rest her weight upon. Papers were filed, hearings attended, and at last her son bore a new surname, Arks. The boy would grow up never doubting who his father was, because fatherhood here was not blood but choice. Their home held no grandeur, but its strength lay in quiet rituals. Shared dinners, long walks where Ark carried the child on his shoulders, nights where exhaustion turned to warmth as Geneva watched the two of them sleep side by side. Every gesture reminded her that love, when honest, required no spectacle. Far away, Evia Dorsey charted her own new course. Her family had closed the door on Dimitri, but not on her. For a time she moved like a shadow, silent at gatherings, her face so polite but drained. Yet slowly she began to rebuild, not on borrowed power, but on her own choosing. She found steadiness in a young resident physician who spoke not of contracts or shares, but of people, of life measured in heartbeats, not profits. His presence was quiet but authentic. For the first time, Evia allowed herself to choose soil, not glass, to plant her future. Dimitri King, meanwhile, disappeared behind bars. The sentence was real, the years marked by routines stripped of illusion. Within the grey walls he turned inward. No letters came from Geneva, no photographs of the child he didn't know by name. He had only his thoughts, and they caged him tighter than steel. Each day was an echo of the last, time spent reckoning with how quickly ambition had devoured everything. When fate finally placed him in Geneva's path again, it wasn't in a courtroom or through legal papers. It was across a street, unplanned. Geneva, Walking with her son's hand in hers, Dmitri, thinner, older, his face hollowed but calmer. Their eyes met in the brief pause before the traffic light changed. No rage, no venom. Just a shared recognition of what once had been and what could never be again, a silent acknowledgement. This was the life we lost. Then the moment broke. Geneva crossed forward, her son tugging at her arm. Dmitri turned away, swallowed by the flow of strangers. Months later, he stepped out of prison on early release. No fanfare, no waiting allies, just a bag of belongings and the weight of choices carved into his past. He didn't return to the city he had burned. Instead, he boarded a bus to someplace nameless, a place where no one recognized his face or his failures. There, perhaps, he could finally live not as a man chasing empires, but simply as a decent human being. The years that followed did not bring trumpets or headlines. They brought something quieter, sturdier, harder to destroy. Geneva Ellis became Geneva Sorrel on a morning without ceremony, in a courthouse where the echo of footsteps mattered more than flowers or music. Ark stood beside her, steady as ever, and when they walked out, the air carried the scent not of luxury but of cinnamon rolls cooling in their modest kitchen. Their son ran through the hallway with laughter sharp and alive, and every corner of their small house smelled of children's cream and hope. The boy bore the Sorrel name proudly, never doubting who his father was. Evia Dorsey's world shifted too. She married the young physician who once spoke to her not of contracts but of life. Their home rang with the cries of two small children, a boy and a girl, who pulled at her skirts as she stirred dinner. At night she sat with her mother and whispered words she never thought she would. "Thank you for your honesty, even when it hurt. Without it, I would still be blind." Tatiana simply nodded, her lesson vindicated not by power, but by her daughter's survival. And Dmitri King, once a man who thought he could buy the sky, lived now in a small town where no one knew his rise or his fall. He worked with his hands, fixing pipes, sanding wood, carrying crates until his muscles ached. The world that once bent for his ambition no longer noticed him, and that anonymity was his salvation. He shared a rented home with a widow and her teenage daughter. Slowly, carefully, he became a presence in the girl's life, repairing her bicycle, helping with schoolwork, speaking words of encouragement instead of promises of grandeur. He would never be the man who built empires again, but he had learned, at last, to be a man who built trust one action at a time. The story ended not in boardrooms or courts, but in kitchens. 3 homes, 3 tables, 3 evenings lit by the same amber glow. Geneva stirred a pot while Ark held their son. Evia hushed her infants while her husband laid the table. Dmitri washed dishes beside a girl who called him by no title, only you. And in that quiet chorus of lives remade, the truth lingered. Each of them received not what they had once desired, but what they had earned and could hold on to. Justice was not a feeling. Justice was movement. Justice was choice. Justice was a verb.